Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Technomosity, dedicated to providing you with information on technology. My name is JP, and today we'll be looking at a history of the evolution of video. Now, I'd like to start off by saying it was a few days ago, and I was engaging in an online session with some random folks and playing the video game Overwatch, which, for those of you who don't know, is a team-based first-person shooter game made by renowned video game production company Blizzard, who had already achieved widespread recognition in the past with the release of games such as 1998's StarCraft and 2004's World of Warcraft, and were actually trying to break into film production with their 2016 film Warcraft, despite its generally poor reception. And as I was playing, a young man, perhaps no older than 15, was speaking through his headset microphone using the game's voice chat feature to chat with his teammates, I being one of them. He had been frantically trying to record and compile footage for his latest video that he would be posting on his YouTube channel. And it was in this moment that it hit me. The popularity and accessibility of video production had truly come such a long way. So, the illusion of motion pictures is based on the optical phenomena known as persistence of vision and the phi phenomenon. The first of these causes the brain to retain images cast upon the retina of the eye for a fraction of a second beyond their disappearance from the field of sight, while the latter creates apparent movement between images when they succeed one another rapidly. Together, these phenomena permit the succession of still frames on a motion picture film strip to represent continuous movement between, when projected at the proper speed. Traditionally, 16 frames per second tends to be reserved for silent films, and 24 frames per second is often used for films with sound. Before the invention of photography, a variety of optical toys exploited this effect by mounting successive phase drawings of things in motion on the face of a twirling disc. That is the Kinetoscope, invented around, say, circa 1832, or inside a rotating drum, as indicated by the zoetrope, invented around 1834. Then, in 1839, Louis-Jacques Mendy Daguerre, again, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, a French painter, perfected the positive photographic process known as daguerreotypy. That's Daguerreotypy. So I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Take it how you will. Just know I mean that. And that same year, the English scientist William Henry Fox Talbot successfully demonstrated a negative photographic process that theoretically allowed unlimited positive prints to be produced from each negative. And as photography was innovated and refined over the next few decades, it became possible to replace the phase drawings in the early optical toys and devices with individually posed phase photographs, a practice that was widely and popularly carried out. Then, fast forward to 1889, legendary inventor Thomas Edison had collaborated with his company's official photographer, William Dickson, to create the kinetoscope, a device that projected several black and white images in rapid succession, the foundation for what video recording would become. Productions with the kinetoscope were often very short, sometimes a few minutes or less. Around the time of the First World War, national film industries were established as films were, becoming more intricate, complex, and developed in their presentations. And the medium's popularity began to grow. And as the popularity of cinema grew, these industries began to invest more and more into their production and distribution. Cinema would continue to see enhancements over the next 30 years, including the addition of color and sound. In fact, by the 1930s and 40s, cinema was actually the dominant form of entertainment, with people often attending cinemas twice weekly. Whereas today, where we often tend to usually attend cinemas once weekly, except for certain occasions with like films such as Avengers, Endgame, or even going back to like say The Dark Knight. I know there were people personally that I know that were attending these films on multiple occasions within the same week. Anyways, the widespread popularity of cinema naturally saw an ever-increasing need for distribution. including ease of access to its audiences. And this led to the advent of television, or TV as it's most commonly referred to, a form of video presentation where a compact screen is integrated onto a placeholder containing cable and antenna input and output devices, and has a signal that could be manipulated with buttons along the TV's interface, or with the use of a separate remote control device. While experimentation with TV had been discussed for years, the earliest form of successful demonstration came in 1927 by Philo Taylor Farnsworth, whose invention involved scanning images with a beam of electrons. And then the Radio Corporation of America, or RCA as it's commonly referred to, invested $50 million in the development of electronic TV. Various public events were aired through its usage, including New York World's Fair opening in 1939, including a speech by then President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who, of course, was the first president to appear on TV, and also the first televised baseball game, Princeton versus Columbia Universities, as another televised event. And in 1941, two 15-minute daily newscasts to a small audience by the Columbia Broadcasting System, or as we know, CBS, on its New York TV station. And by 1949, TV became much more commercial. While many early forms of TV programming had borrowed from network radio, which was the most popular communications medium at the time, TV networks soon began establishing themselves, garnering many substantial profits of their own, so much so that network radio's popularity would eventually become significantly reduced to being providers of hourly newscasts. Through the late 1940s into the early 1950s, broadcasts had become challenged as then Senator Joseph McCarthy began to make claims that broadcasting was being used to air communist messages to the public. Now, these statements actually went largely unchallenged until former radio reporter Edward Murrow, on his and Fred Friendly's See It Now program, narrated a report in 1954 on McCarthy in attempts to expose the senator's shoddy tactics. And CBS, while initially hesitant on airing this report, gave McCarthy free time to speak on the broadcast a month later, and in doing so, Murrow's message towards the senator became apparent, and McCarthy's reign of fear, if you will, would soon come to an end. And actually that same year, the U.S. Senate would actually censure McCarthy, and CBS would shut down their quote-unquote security office as a result. It wasn't until the 1950s when TV would take drastic steps away from radio formats. The networks actually began to air more of their own original programming, including the U.S. Steel Hour in 1953, Disneyland and 12 Angry Men in 1954, and the $64,000 Question in 1955, to name a few. TV would also eventually start airing politics more regularly around this time, including for the 1960 election of President John F. Kennedy. In 1967, the Public Broadcasting System, or as we know it, PBS, would be established by the United States Congress, which, unlike commercial networks centered in New York and Los Angeles, would actually be spread across the country. PBS, as of 2020, actually comprises more than 350 stations that serve all 50 states. Puerto Rico, the U.S., Virgin Islands, Guam, and American Samoa also included in that. The network took a different approach to other networks in that its purpose was more for educational use and was a private, non-profit corporation. The rise of cable would challenge the dominance of the three major TV networks, that's CBS, NBC, and ABC. And as a matter of fact, these networks actually are still the dominant news networks today, if I'm not mistaken. I think Fox was actually one of the networks that were added onto them. I don't know if they're actually one of the top ones, but they're up there. Just know that CBS, NBC, and ABC were the real big networks. And these networks would offer choices of among dozens, even hundreds of channels, as opposed to the few that would air through then standard broadcasting. In the 1960s, the growth of cable through the importation of distant signals was viewed as competition by local TV stations. Responding to these industry concerns, the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC as we know them, expanded its jurisdiction by placing restrictions on the ability of cable systems to import distant television signals. As a result of these restrictions, there was a freeze effect on the development of cable systems in major markets, lasting into the early 70s. And this freeze lasted until 1972, when a policy of gradual cable deregulation led to, among other things, modified restrictions on the importation of distant signals. The clamp on growth had adverse financial effects, especially on access to capital. Money for cable growth and expansion all but dried up for several years. However, concerted industry efforts at the federal, state, and local levels, resulted in the continued lessening of restrictions on cable throughout the decade. These changes, coupled with cable's pioneering of satellite communications technology, led to a pronounced growth of services to consumers and a substantial increase in cable subscribers. In 1972, Charles Dolan and Gerald Levin of Sterling Manhattan Cable launched the nation's first pay TV network, Home Box Office, or as we know it, HBO. You know, that same network that actually airs shows Game of Thrones, or, what's another one? Sopranos. This venture led to the creation of a national satellite distribution system that used a newly approved domestic satellite transmission. Satellites changed the business dramatically, paving the way for explosive growth of program networks. The 1980s saw a further explosion of cable as the 1984 Cable Act established a more favorable regulatory framework for the industry, which involved stimulating investment in cable plan and programming on an unprecedented level. The Music Television Network, or MTV, was also launched in 1981 as a way for music artists to promote their work through the creation and advertising of videos centered around their creative works. This network would actually expand further to include many other opportunities for marketing, including original shows such as The Real World in 1992. Remember that show. In fact, from 1984 through 1992, the industry spent more than $15 billion on the wiring of America, and billions more on program development. This was the largest private construction project since World War II to this time. By the end of the decade, actually, the 80s, nearly 53 million households subscribed to cable, and cable program networks had increased from 28 in 1980 to 79 in 1989. Going into the 1990s, the 1990s saw development of a new type of medium that would take the world by storm, the internet. Now, this went from something on several government organizations, something only several government organizations and businesses had access to something that would become much more commercial for use across households everywhere. The explosion of the internet brought with it a huge range of possibilities and communication on a scale unprecedented by past mediums. With the efficiency of the internet in business compared to the use of landline phones for calling and TV for broadcast, the internet, with its use of sound, video, text, and interactivity, had shown tremendous potential to investors. Early forms of the internet used dial-up technology, which required the use of modems to decode audio signals into data to send to a router or computer, and to encode signals from the latter two devices to send to another modem. Broadband and Wi-Fi would actually come to replace dial-up, which allowed a significantly higher volume of data to be transferred at faster speeds by using what's called asymmetric digital subscriber line, or ADSL connection. And with this explosion in popularity, many websites were formed, utilizing different features and forms of communication. These included video sites being used to stream video footage previously recorded from a camera, transferred to a computer for editing, and then uploaded for others to view. The sites also provided the option for the viewing audience to respond to these videos with text comments. One particular site that made heavy use of this, which had been launched online in the 2000s and had been gaining huge ground on the internet, was the popular video sharing site YouTube. YouTube was a place where users could upload videos they had created to the site for audience viewing. What separated the viewing of video on the internet from other mediums such as TV or cinema was the instant availability or accessibility of these videos, which could be viewed at any time on the viewer's choosing. Users would simply log onto their computers or mobile devices, which were, of course, the most popular devices used for accessing the internet at this point, and would either search for the video on an internet search engine or go to one of these video sharing sites such as YouTube to find it amongst millions of other videos. Which brings me back to my previously mentioned online gaming session experience and the sort of historical reflection brought about by the young man's mentioning of the creation of his latest YouTube video. Video sharing online had been mostly but a niche sort of hobby or pastime during the years of YouTube's infancy. Many at the time had no idea, me included, had no idea that the site would eventually become to be a potential competitor with cinema or TV. As time progressed into the 2010s, we've actually seen video become, as I was mentioning, much more accessible than ever before, whether it's through their viewing or even their creation. Going from something over time that only a select number of people had access to, creating, be it in laboratories, production sets, and studios, or by simply having a lofty budget to purchase the tools needed, to something almost everyone and their grandmothers use now by something as simple as hitting a record button on their phone and sharing their recorded piece with viewers across the globe. So in all, it's impossible to accurately predict the future, although by learning about the past and present, we can make a very likely assessment of what's to come. Regarding the future of video, I think we may actually see gradual shifts towards the use of virtual reality or VR. This has been hinted by the use of augmented reality or AR and recording devices such as smartphones to enhance or even alter the video creator's appearance and or environment. Popular social media platforms, that's platforms widely used on the internet for communicating with friends, families, and colleagues, or just doing business with others even. These social media sites such as Snapchat have actually made use of this AR technology as well, and is actually one of the site's most used features. Music artists such as Bjork have also made use of 3D presentation in their music video production. In fact, a popular social media platform, Facebook, have also invested in the Oculus Quest, which is a popular VR technology used for playing video games and sharing video content. Whatever the direction video may take, though, its importance simply cannot be understated or ignored at this point. It is likely that video's prominence will only continue to grow down the road, bringing people closer than ever through various experiences, activities, and values. And that does it for this episode. Follow or subscribe to this podcast and share it with others that may like or benefit from the content provided. And stay tuned for any future content through this podcast, on YouTube, or on the Technomosity website, technomosity.com. That's TECHNOMOSITY.com. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Technomosity. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode.